Good evening. Tonight we are going to be summarizing Module 9 for Course 3. I believe this is the last module. There are only 9 modules in Course 3, so I hope my previous videos have helped you. Let's not waste any time and summarize this and get on with our course. Okay, Lesson 1, they talk about essential elements of a lease. The essential elements of a lease: all contracts, including leases, require certain elements to be detailed. The elements are 1. Legal name of the parties, 2. Legal competence of all signatories, and 3. Readily identifiable description of the property, 4. Consideration, 5. Legal purpose for use of the property, 6. Start and end dates of a lease, and 7. What is expected of each party. Moving on to Lesson 2. Lesson 2 talks about key leasing documents. So credit check. Landlords should always complete a credit check. They should review the report for a credit score, history of accounts, and current status of accounts. Rental application. Complete a rental application is required as a first step to protecting a landlord's rights and gathering appropriate information on a prospective tenant. The things to look for include completion of the application, income, frequent change of address or job, short lead term, current accommodation, living, including living with relatives, request to pay the last month's rent after moving in. So references can provide significant information about the prospective tenant. Landlords should always follow up with all references, including past and current employment references, personal references, past and current landlord references. Proof of employment and income. Independent verification of employment and income is prudent when taking a new tenant. Sources for such information include paycheck stubs, notice of assessment, the company HR department, online employee list, the company phone directory, and receptionist. Online search. An online search can return several results that can provide insight into the prospective tenant's character and status. Examples include personal social media sites, company details, professional networking sites, landlord references, name and search, phone number or email address search. Moving on to Lesson 3. Lesson 3 is leases versus agreement to lease. So the key aspects of the parties. The agreement to lease must obtain the following information to prevent fraud and ensure the contract is legally binding: the date of the agreement, full legal names of all tenants, full legal names of all landlords, address of the landlord. So the typical terms to complete an agreement to lease, there's clauses and then contents of the clause. So clause where they talk about premises, the address and legal description of the premises to which the agreement applies, clause term of lease, the start date and duration of the lease, and then the clause rent. Content is the amount of rent, the date is payable, and the rent period. Clause deposit and prepaid rent, and the contents, the amount of deposit and any prepaid rent, and the timing of payment and who receives it. Clause use, and the content is the acceptable use of the property. And then there's a clause services and cost. The content is the available services to the property, available services at the property, and who pays for them. Clause parking, whether parking is available and if so, where. Clause irrevocability, content, the date and time which an offer is irrevocable. Clause notices, content is fax and email details for delivering information to the parties. And then there's a clause additional terms and schedules. Contents is space for additional terms or to direct the reader to a schedule of additional terms of the agreement. And then more terms in the agreement that need not competition. Typical terms in the agreement to lease that need no completion. So there's a bunch of clause and contents. Sure, we can go through them. Clause execution of lease, the requirement, and then the content is the requirement to execute the lease on a standard form of lease and provide the required documents to the tenant. And then there's a clause access, allows the landlord to access the property for a specific period, specific reason with the required notice. Clause insurance, that requires the tenant to carry adequate fire, property damage, and liability insurance for the entire tenancy. Clause residency, the landlord who becomes a non-resident must inform the tenant so both can comply with withholding tax rules. Clause use and distribution of personal information, consent from the tenant to collect and distribute personal information to determine creditworthiness and suitability for the rental property. Clause conflict and discrepancy, any clause added to the agreement overrides a standard clause in the agreement. And then consumer reports, notification to the tenant that a report containing credit and personal information may be connected to the lease transaction. Clause binding agreement, confirmation that the agreement is binding on both parties. And then clause landlord and tenant acknowledgement that the landlord and tenant have received a signed copy of the lease and permission to send a copy to their lawyers. And then clause Family Act law warrants that spouse consent is not required for the landlord to lease the property. And then signature requirements, both parties must sign the agreement to lease using their regular signatures. They must also initial every page and any change made in the agreements. Signatures confirm the parties understand and agree with every clause. Electronic signatures do not need to be witnessed. All others must be witnessed and dated. Electronic signatures are acceptable if all parties consent to their use. Schedules to the agreement. A schedule is used to add multiple clauses in an agreement. When adding a schedule to an agreement, the schedule must state that it is part of the agreement, name the parties to the agreement, and state the date of the agreement. Okay, lesson 1 is complete. Moving on to lesson 4. Agreement to lease for a residential real property. To quickly summarize this, completing an agreement to lease often requires you as a salesperson to write additional clauses to address terms and conditions specific to that rental unit. You must write them clearly and precisely to protect your client or customer and to ensure both parties understand the implications and their obligations. Common additional clauses are those that address the following items: tenant credit check condition, rules regarding their use of any shared facilities with other tenants, rules regarding pets, such as pets must be on a leash when in the common areas of the property, rent-free periods or discounts, key deposits, remote entry devices or cards, other services or utilities in addition to the rent, such as seasonal rent increase or for an air conditioner or block heater plug-in, or fee for additional appliances such as a laundry machine or dishwasher. Warranty or agreement regarding the condition or in conclusion of appliances. Okay, so lesson 4 basically talks about that. Let's see if we can find any good information here. Yeah, basically everything here we've talked about. Moving on to lesson 5. Agreement to lease for a condominium. So lesson summary, basically completing an agreement to lease on a condominium often requires you as a salesperson to write additional clauses to include terms and conditions that address specific requirements to the unit and condominium property. This literally seems like the same thing as the last lesson. You must write them clearly and precisely to protect your client or customer and ensure both parties understand the implications and their obligations. Basically the same thing. It is especially important for the tenant to understand the rules of the condominium before signing any agreement to lease. Common additional clauses for condominiums include those that address the following items: adherence by the tenant and their guests to condominium rules and regulations, locker provisions, tenant approval by the board of directors if applicable, rules or additional costs associated with the use of common areas. Moving on to lesson 6. amendments, notices of fulfillment of conditions, and waivers. Wow. Okay, lesson summary. Basically, sometimes an amendment to the agreement is necessary. An amendment makes changes to the details that have been finalized in the agreement. Once the agreement to lease has been completed and signed, some conditions must be fulfilled or waived. Knowing how to amend the agreement and how to confirm conditions are fulfilled and how to waive conditions will help you as a salesperson enable a smooth leasing agreement between the landlord. Let's see if we can find more information on that. A notice of fulfillment enables one party to an agreement to confirm to another party of the agreement that one or more conditions have been fulfilled. Waiver. Let's see. A waiver enables one party to waive their right to fulfill a condition to the agreement of lease. One example, although not recommended, may be waiving the right to conduct a credit check on a prospective tenant. Okay, basically that was the lesson summary. Moving on to lesson 7, which is basically summary practice activities and then the module summary. I highly recommend you go through these summary practice activities because they're very helpful. Excuse me, they're very helpful. And the module summary is everything we've talked about. Okay. Yeah. So this is it. This was course 3. I hope you learned something. I hope my videos actually helped you. My exam is coming up soon, so wish me luck, and I wish you luck on your course 3. And yeah, that's it. Good night. Until next time.